MSPs have voted to suspend Michael Matheson from Holyrood for 27 days after the former Health Secretary attempted to use expenses to cover an £11,000 data roaming bill racked up on his parliamentary iPad. It's the most severe punishment ever handed out to an MSP. The SNP abstained, while the Tories also forced a vote on Matheson's future, calling for him to resign. Here's a flavour of what happened in the chamber.
In light of Stephen Kerr's comments, when other members of the Standards Committee also made public comments, they should have recused themselves. Another member declared in public that Mr Matheson's position was untenable, he should quit, he should be sacked as Minister, and that his admission should not be believed. By any measure, that clearly prejudges the complaint and the sanction.
Are we really going to have the bizarre and perhaps unique approach in the Scottish Parliament, a bizarre and unique approach in the Scottish Parliament, where the SNP successfully amend a motion to the wording of their choice, and then the SNP won't vote for the SNP amended motion? Will the Deputy First Minister confirm that is her plan this afternoon?
Had Michael Matheson confessed when first challenged, it might have led to one day's uncomfortable headlines and an acknowledgement from all of us that there, but for the grace of God, we go. But the problem was that there was no admission of error, no apology, no contrition. Instead, there appears to have been denial, deflection and dishonesty.
Well, to assess today's proceedings, we were joined by STV's political correspondent Colin Mackay. So MSPs voted on two motions today. Tell us what happened.
Well, on the second motion, let me start there. That's the easier one to explain. The Conservatives were calling on Michael Matheson to resign his seat in Falkirk West. Now, that wasn't going to be a binding motion. It was never really likely to get passed, and it didn't. It got amended by a Green motion, which is basically calling for a review of the entire investigation process for complaints in the Scottish Parliament. So it was kind of amended out of all sorts of shape. The Tories, in the end, actually had to vote against their own amended motion. But that comes just after the Conservatives were criticising the SNP for voting, or for abstaining essentially, on the first vote on the motion from the Standards Committee, which they'd amended. So the motion from the Standards Committee wanted to suspend Michael Matheson for 27 days from the Scottish Parliament and basically fine him 54 days' wages. That is the toughest sanction ever imposed on anyone in the Scottish Parliament by the Standards Committee. The SNP weren't very keen on that, but they knew that they couldn't get a vote together in the Parliament that would overturn the timescale or the money involved. So what they did was they proposed an amendment that, again, like the Green amendment that I just mentioned, would basically call for further investigation of the whole process in the Parliament, because John Swinney had been quite critical of the process, particularly about Annie Wells, the Conservative MSP, who was on the committee making that judgment on Michael Matheson, although beforehand she had already said her piece on that, and you know, John Swinney thought that meant that she was prejudging things, so he thought the whole thing was wrong. But in the end, everything is pretty much as it was. I'm glad you had to explain that rather than me, Colin. What does all this mean for Michael Matheson? What it means is that Michael Matheson is now suspended from the Scottish Parliament for 27 days. That's the best part of 5 weeks in working days terms. So he's not going to be back in Parliament or in his constituency office until after the summer recess. So constituents in Falkirk West will still be able to go to his constituency office and his staff will deal with things, but he won't be able to ask questions in the Parliament or appear in the Parliament or anything like that. Also, he's going to effectively be fined the equivalent of almost 2 months' wages. Yeah. That comes to about £11,000 coincidentally, probably not coincidentally, because that's the amount of money that he ran up on his iPad bill in Morocco. Will all this be damaging at all to the SNP's election campaign? I think it already has been damaging for the SNP's election campaign. We're just a week in, and it's already been one of the factors that certainly dominated the last couple of days. The Conservatives have really focused in on this over the last few days in Falkirk West and Perth and John Swinney's backyard yesterday. So they really are honing in on this. I think it will come up at First Minister's questions again tomorrow. It's not over yet by a long chalk.